Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Yeah, heard half the room, that means the other half's chewing, right? Still? Thank you, Alan, for having me here today. My name is Vinn White. I am a senior advisor to Governor Murphy. Over here in Trenton, I've joined the team 2 months ago. And just to give you a little bit of my background, last year I spent a whirlwind year with Deloitte Consulting, talking about all this fun stuff, what we call the future of mobility, smart cities, self-driving cars, connected vehicles. Prior to that, I spent 8 years with the Obama administration, all 8 at USDOT. I worked for Secretaries LaHood, Secretary Fox. You couldn't have had 2 more opposite personalities when it came to leadership. You had Secretary LaHood. He was the congressman from Peoria, Illinois. He was on the back end of his career arc and Republican. Followed up by Anthony Fox, who was a mayor of Charlotte, African-American, who really knew and understood and was interested in the local level. We spent the first half of that period in kind of a defensive posture. We had the Recovery Act, we had Hurricane Sandy, which impacted this region. But then once we got our legs under us and Secretary Fox came on board, we were able to kind of sustain ourselves, pull ourselves together, and start to do some forward-leaning things. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. I'll try not to suck up too much oxygen. I want to save some for the rest of the room, for the rest of the program. But I'd be remiss without first acknowledging, because some of this actually comes up in the points I want to raise, that on my way over here, I learned of a really bad bus accident in North Jersey. And so a school bus colliding what looks like head-on with a dump truck, and so I want to acknowledge that. That's actually, it's in Mount Olive, which is my hometown, and so it's pretty bad right now. I bring it up because safety is our #1 mission. As I work with New Jersey DOT and some of the other agencies, what we're trying to do is really drive down incidents like that. But first I want to pan back and talk a little bit about what I describe as this bigger mobility ecosystem. You've probably heard terms like that thrown around a lot lately. And I take them to heart because I worked at DOT where we had 10 operating administrations or modes, as you would describe them: aviation, transit, highways, and even some of the other known, unknown suspects like NHTSA and some others. And so there are a lot of players in this ecosystem. One of the things that we wanted to do, and you've heard some of you from this area have heard the governor talk about creating a stronger, fairer New Jersey. And for us, that means considering all transportation options for all New Jersey residents. Because at the end of the day, it is an ecosystem. In fact, I use this kind of anecdotally, but I find that there's a purpose in using different modes of transportation depending on what you're doing at that given time, right? So, if I live in Newark, I'm not going to take a bike share to a wedding in New York. If I'm living in Newark, I'm not going to visit my family in Pennsylvania in an Uber, right? So the bottom line, I think, is that what we want to do is we want to preserve the system that we've inherited and augment it and optimize it and supersize it, all these words you heard. And I think that's important. And so you've seen that in action. The governor, one of the first things he did was he established an executive order to help strengthen our transit system. Now, I know nobody's here to talk about transit today, but we've been talking about LiDAR for a day and a half, so I think it's sort of appropriate to maybe touch on some of these other mobility options. And I like to think of transit, it's kind of right now, it's the train that could and will, and it'll get better. But transit to me is the ultimate multimodal mode of transportation. And if you go to any big city, you're seeing more of this every year. It's how do the bikes stack up and how do they interact with the transit system? Pedestrians, cars, ride sharing. Everybody, the ride sharing companies all want a piece of that curb. And in some cases, it's starting to compete. And in some cases, it's starting to cannibalize. So I think it's important that we keep in mind that we've inherited a system that's functional, that still, while it caters to 4% of New Jersey residents, it still provides hundreds of thousands of trips a day. And so both on the bus and on the rail side. So, I just want to make sure that I kind of put that point out there. And so supporting New Jersey Transit, giving it a 172% increase in our proposed budget, it's designed to augment the workforce. It's designed to bring the right talent on board. Our proposal wants to expand rail and bus. It wants to take a look at the software that's moving it. And one thing you've heard us talk about in New Jersey is how we're going to meet the call to implement positive train control. And I bring up positive train control because, there's rail being automated, and so there's your nexus now, right, with what it is we're talking about here today, but automation in that context. So I shared the disturbing news earlier today, and the fact of the matter is, in 2016, New Jersey had 516 fatalities on the roads. One is too many, but 516, that's siblings, that's parents, that's friends. Mercer County, where we are today, over 12,000 crashes in 2016. Now what's interesting is, if you go back to 2001, it was about the same. And you start to ask yourself these questions. Now, there's a lot of variables at play. If you ask yourself the questions, what are the dominant factors, right? Vehicle miles traveled, maybe. Distracted driving is what I like to look at as the new vulnerability that we are facing. So if you look at that timeline, though, whether it's fatalities or it's crashes in the state, we've improved by, I think, statewide, something like 1,000 crashes from 2001 to 2016. But in the middle, we hit a little bit of a downslope, a bottom. And sure, it was during the Great Recession, and more miles are being traveled today than ever before. So sure, that number is bound to go up. But we were 30,000 crashes fewer in 2010. That's a significant number. And so, again, I don't want to pin it on one variable. We know that there's a lot at play. But those are significant because, again, those are lives. We can't predict. I've been in these types of forums more in the last few years. And when I say these types, I mean on this topic, I think I've been in more autonomous and connected related forums in the last 2 or 3 years than if you were to take all these other different forms of technology and different modes of travel combined. So there's a lot of conversation going on right now about this, and it's exciting. It's really exciting. But one thing I come away with is, for every study that you refer to that says this is going to be a panacea, this is going to be utopia, we're going to get rid of all of the garages, and we're going to put in green space, infill. We're going to reconnect lives. There's a study or some other reference point that says it's dystopian. You saw Alan's multiple Waymo cars just taking over the city. And the truth of the matter is, right, I mean, it's a fact that Uber is playing in this space, and Uber and ride-hailing in general is congesting our cities. So there's no dispute there. I mean, the numbers are there. So if this technology is deployed, which of these worlds are we going to have? It likely will be in the middle, right? And I'm reminded yesterday when I was here, and Sam Schwartz gave the presentation on what was largely about land use and making the right decisions. He had this slide that kind of had this continuum line of like good, bad, or great, worst. I forget what it was, but it showed somebody getting out of the car on their own. It looks like they walked out of their entertainment center and they own the car, and that's how they're going to drive. And then you've got the model that I think Alan is alluding to, which is the sharing model. And I think that there are, three ways to compound it to good, and that is going to be, as these things are electric, as these things are shared, okay, and as they are autonomous, we're going to start to see it tilt in the direction of the benefits. So I think you dubbed my session the "Where does New Jersey fit in?" And I think I've said enough to paint the picture, but what we're trying to do is we are trying to improve the mobility options for all residents. We're trying to connect the disconnected communities. We're trying to think about all the big ideas that go into getting the disabled to work, that go into getting distressed communities opportunity. And so, to me, all the options are on the table, including the AV option. So we're looking at suburban, rural regions. We're looking at the urbanized areas. We're looking at those disconnected communities. And I wish I were here today to tell you that I'm announcing the opening of a test site. Sorry, Alan. No, I lied to you. No. And I wish I could tell you that we're ready to launch, we're ready to push out autonomous vehicle guidelines. I worked with Nat Buse, who was here yesterday, on the first of its kind AV guidelines back in September 2016. So that was great. That was a great exercise, and it was something that was needed in the marketplace. And it was great to see the new administration take it and try to evolve it, take it to the next steps. But I'm not here to say New Jersey's launching AV regs. And similarly, a task force, right? Like, that sounds like a great natural next step. But I think one thing, when you look at the market, is true. It's fairly indisputable. It's while all this activity is going on, you've got maybe a third of the states that are your forward leaners, okay? You've got, and I think it's about 25 states have enacted some level of legislation, whether it's standards or launching a committee or some kind of rules of the road. So you've got your forward leaders, and then you've got those who are kind of AV curious, right? Like, they're kind of in the middle, and they're dabbling, and they're inviting companies, and then you've got kind of the everybody else. And there's an advantage to being one versus maybe one of the others. The first through the door, right? There's sort of that old saying, if you're the first through the door, I mean, you're either going to be the pioneer, you're going to take the bullets, and you're going to fail, or you're going to succeed. And then there's the advantage, but there's also a disadvantage to being those who walk through the door later, because they get to see what's been tried and tested, and they can kind of make their moves or plot their strategies based off of what they're seeing. And then there's everybody else. And I've spoken to Alan about this at length now, just about the everybody else. And are we everybody else? I can tell you we were everybody else.
That's a big say.
And I like to think I'm here to help move us into these other areas. Myself and my colleagues, the governor, is certainly behind it. So, while I'm not here today to announce any of these big, shiny things, we would have loved to have done like an Ohio Kasich thing, right? But I think we recognize that there are some interim steps that need to be taken. And while we're not here to announce that, I can tell you we're here to announce that we're open for business. And more importantly, what better place to say this, we're open to ideas. Alan and I have met. We've talked a little bit about who it is that you would bring to the table, what those players would look like. And I like to think that those are those initial steps. So whereas maybe the previous administration didn't necessarily embark on this journey, and I understand that some on the Hill in New Jersey have actually tried to get some traction on this front. I like to think that it's a new day and there's a new way forward. So thank you for having me here at the summit. I'm open to any questions. Again, I'm 2 months old, so I'll tell you what I can in New Jersey. And again, just reflecting on what's happened today in North New Jersey. I like to let that gravity kind of weigh on us a little bit as we think about this stuff. I think that this technology, while it's not going to be a panacea, and while maybe the future is not complete utopia, I think that when it comes to things like cutting our carbon footprint, when it comes to increasing mobility and providing options for communities that can't get what they need, and when it comes to saving lives, this technology holds a lot of promise. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the summit.
Question.
You made a very big statement, and thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? No questions? Yes. Mike Scrutato, you agree one of the members is going to be in the room. Go ahead.
Great.
Mike.
Hey, Mike. Welcome to the team, as Alan says.
You'd agree our U.S. headquarters are right out here on Route 1. Great to hear what you said here today, but how are you going to signal that welcome mat out to people not at this summit?
It's a great question, and I think it's...
John's right here, and he's in the video.
So,
I don't know, and we'll get through.
So the signal, right? Mike, that's a great question. And I think right now, there was a lot to try and, I say repair, a lot of catch up in general. So, you've got your backlog of things that you're really just trying to, if you're in my shoes or in my office on a daily basis, we're just churning and going and pulling late nights and things like that. But I think that the broader signal comes in the form of our innovation agenda. And when you look at, the space with being developed with Rutgers, right? The Innovation Hub, right? This concept, we've, ready to break ground on that. And getting our thinking caps on, who are the players for something like that. I think that signal in general, and we've done this in a few forms and fashions. We're going to have additional signals pulsed out there. The signal for AVs, believe me, I came here from DOT after we put together those guidelines, and then I came here after Deloitte, which is always thinking about, the new tech thing. I came here and we're going to do some important stuff like fix the roads and bridges, but I also came here to think big on aspects of innovation. So, your smart city, your connected city, ways to think about, how do we take the initial steps on autonomous and connected? Where do we do that? And that's another reason why Alan and I thinking about who to pull in on this is important, because, we're all right. We leave this room and we're all, I don't know, if there's 200 people here, we're 200 experts on this topic. But you go out into the world and, there are people who have never seen an AV up close. There are people who don't realize that there are kind of the precursor aspects of connected vehicles in their cars today. So it's up to us to spread the gospel. Any other questions?
Rachel Liu, I'm a professor from NJIT.
She's also part of it.
She's also a member. Nice to have you. This is the inaugural meeting of the minds.
But my question is a little bit deviated from AV today because you mentioned the bus, and also I appreciate you actually cite the safety data up to 2011, which said you did your homework, you actually did, the safety data correctly, because I actually done the past 10-year study from 2002 all the way to 2012, which is when my study took place. And the actual data, if you follow through, that's the lowest year. After that, it went up. And I think you recognize that.
Yep.
At the same period, New Jersey actually implemented the law, like distracting driving. It's illegal if you take your phone while driving. I know you just got out this 2 months, so any plans or any plan from you, maybe talk to the governor, because we do have the UTC. Like we used to do a lot of study for DOT, but that funding is drying up. This is a very good topic, along with the AV, we can do, Alan had a suggestion, let's take Central Jersey as a, lab, let's get the testing. The best place to probably start at university and UTC center. I mean, fine.
Yeah, no, I'll react to that, and I agree with you that some of these controlled environments, especially places that require sort of longer distance, maybe it's parking lot to the classroom or across campus, they are ideal laboratories for deploying. I think what the next steps hold are that there are a number, maybe in this room too, there are a number of technologists. There are some that are now mashing together with OEMs, and they're finding ways to deploy this. I was just speaking with somebody from Jacksonville who's talking about moving people there. So I agree. So if I can try to pick at the heart of what you're asking, it is the funding and the action behind this as a UTC. Yeah, I mean, we don't control the UTC selections, unfortunately. This is the second time in a week I've heard about UTC selections, so.
You have the US field team connection there.
Yeah, and so what I'd like to do is I have my own personal do-outs to engage the federal level to try and see if we can shake some of that stuff loose. So we should share information after this. Thank you. Yes.
So you spoke about the next section. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the resources that you may be mobilizing, more financial resources?
Yeah. And so our budget proposal, right? I'm not going to bore with the figures because right now until it's legislated, it's not enacted. But we're going through that process now, and there are resources dedicated for that. Now, outside of that, I think that one of the more valuable resources, really, it's your college systems, your private and your state college university systems, your junior college system, which New Jersey has, I think it's like 20. There are, in the state system, there's 11 universities. I met, not to impose Rutgers in this hallowed space, but
Okay, that's okay.
is that okay? Okay. And so a state university that will remain unnamed, I met with them this week, and they told me about all the activity that they're doing and how there wasn't as much engagement with the state as they would have liked. And I'm going to say that it's possible that that's the case for most of the universities, and particularly the community college system. I don't know. I wasn't here, so that's my excuse. But it's interesting to me that so much activity has been undertaken. Even things like this summit is being done or was planned in the absence of the state sort of support, but
Absolutely. It had no state support.
it had no state support. I just showed up in the,
Until you showed
Until
up.
I showed up.
It had no.
But I guess that's my point, is that there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. One thing that we're really interested in is the notion of retention, right? Like, why should all of these great minds, why should they attend NJIT and the Rutgers system and Princeton and then go off and do something in another state, some other place? So how do we retain that talent? But I think one of the ideas, one of the pillars to that plan is to, I say leverage, don't confuse that with use, right? Is to, in partnership, leverage the resources that we have on both sides to do things, but to do them in New Jersey. So it's kind of a cloudy cloudier answer than you were expecting, but I think it's important to be honest that we're looking at all the tools in the toolbox to see how it is that we can jumpstart, upstart, get traction, get momentum, you name it, whatever the word is. Just to get some energy around this. Paul.
You mentioned some broader objectives and some things that you were thinking about in terms of, and you even mentioned sort of that whole smart city type approach, so broader than some of the conversations we're having here. I'm wondering, when you were at Deloitte, if you did any work on that Portuguese project in Cascade that is, I think it's probably one of the best examples in the world.
Thank you. I didn't work on it. I know of it. I know about it. I know that there is a beautiful place in Portugal called Cascais that is led by a very ambitious mayor who has thrown all resources and really broadened the tent in terms of trying to invite talent to come up with a very unique approach to smart city deployment. At Deloitte, yeah, we definitely, there was a delegation that actually went out that way to observe it, with the idea, with the notion that, right, because all of these, ultimately, you don't want to invent the new thing, because then you've got a billion new things. You want to perfect the new thing that works and then transpose it over a bunch of other sort of geographies and places. And so Cascade is very much a success story. I was also part of the team at USDOT that administered the Smart City Challenge, the $40 million that went to Columbus. And it was interesting because my travels here had me sort of looking back at that. Two applications came out of New Jersey. So I think it was Newark and Jersey City. So once again, the ideas are there, but through that exercise alone, this is similar to what a Cascade goes through, is the sort of internal, the honest conversation about what are our challenges, what are we trying to do, where do we want to get to, at the risk of offending some vendors who are not in this room, I promise. Myself, a recovering maybe vendor, if you think about Deloitte a little bit. Sometimes you get that strategy and you start to think to yourself, well, what is it that we need? And soon you start coming in contact with those who can supply different solutions. And no matter how they walk through the front door, sometimes, again, nobody in this room, sometimes it's a hammer looking for a nail. And that can befall any municipality, any leadership structure. It might not even have to be in the context of government. It could be other organizations trying to formulate a strategy. And so for those of you who are in the municipal side, one thing I would always say is, make sure you come up with your roadmap. Make sure that you understand your work streams, like how you want to get from here to there, what the resources are, right? And when I say resources, I don't mean dollars in the bank. I mean, who are the stakeholders that are going to come to the table, right? Where's your in-kind? Where's your, what's your budget? But then at the very outset, you need to understand and articulate your challenge. And now we're off on a little bit of a tangent, but coming back to the Smart City Challenge and with Columbus, I've been asked so many times, more times than I can count, like, why did Columbus get this? Why not Pittsburgh and Austin and Portland and all these other places with great ideas? I was honest. I said, you know what? They did a really good job of articulating their challenge, and they did a phenomenal job of telling the story of how they were going to meet it using technology. So, and the story goes, they've got, in this little anecdote, but they have a community on the outskirts where the infant mortality rate is twice the national average. And they determined that it really kind of boiled down to the distressed community, African-American dominant mothers who are expecting, missing their appointments with their doctors. It sounds like such an easy thing for all of us to kind of think about and get around, like, oh, well, how is that an impediment? Well, the bottom line is, like, they kind of go back to the back of the line when they miss the appointment. And so that all of a sudden starts to endanger the infant. So what they did was they said, what we want to do is use technology in a way. We want to, outfit our buses and develop a different way of thinking of how we're going to get them there. If they miss the appointment, there's an automated sort of reappointment that gets them in the queue. We don't have to wait for the follow-up phone call. And we think that we can drive that infant mortality rate down. We said, that's great, because for the federal investment, we can tell everybody we're saving babies, right? So a little bit of a tangent there. But I think that there are some principles in that response that you can use that we can use as a state to try to get to where we want to go. So, and Alan, you say it really well. Like, look at how much of the state is underserved by transit, right? But
That's what we want. That's absolutely what. This is not to provide us more mobility. We have plenty.
Right.
There's so many pockets,
Right.
that really could use it, and we have no convenient way, no good way to do it. It's very expensive and so on.
Yep.
And Jerry's running numbers, and so that's centered to this proposal, or this concept.
Yep. And so I think that, there's no shortage of brain power that can come together to actually think of the solutions and what they'll look like. The resources will be the question, but, let's start the first few steps and see how we get there. Just know that you have the backing of the governor to take those steps and the steps beyond that, and to go to the solutions. Any other questions?
What did you do? I had the backing of the governor, what? I said what?
I just really wanted to say that thank you for opening the door and hopefully using a resource like Alan and the team that he has to really get something done in the state, hopefully make it leader in lifelong residents.
It's a great thing, Fred. Thank you. I do look at these other states, and I see this sort of, trying to get to the top of the mountain, who's going to get there first. And, there's a clear economic development play when it comes to this technology, sure. We saw the Kasich thing. But, we do need to make sure that it's done well thought out with the right resources, because there are a number of places that announce things, but we want to go beyond an announcement.
One more question.
Yeah.
Oh, from Italy. Here, watch out for this one.
I was wondering, well, that is difficult now. I cannot ask the question anymore because everybody's expecting fireworks. I was just, asking a very simple question, which is, beside the technology, which is okay, interesting, important, etc., can be development. But what would you say is the biggest challenge in the mobility management of this state?
Great question. And it's one that we sort of try to get our heads around with, I participate in it's kind of a local roving conference. It's called Transportation Camp, right? And actually, Matt, you've been there. And so we tried to tackle a little bit of the challenges, right? That would lead us to wider spread deployment, right? So we could back our way into a year because, if you ask 12 different experts and OEMs what year we're going to have wider spread deployment, you're going to get 12 different answers. It's going to be everything from 6 months or 18 months from now to like the year 2040. So, but for the challenges, I think what we distilled was that there are policy challenges. But I think that those are things that we can put some thought into to try and overcome. There are legislative challenges, okay, and many of the states are, like I said, they're moving forward. You've got like a third, if not half of the nation is trying in some way to enact something to get it started. And more I see and hear, and in that context in particular, the adoption is the next big challenge, is how many people are going to get into these cars. And I always go back to the C-Touch thing that, it's an anecdote, but, my parents were going to get into an Uber for the first time. My dad asked me 3 questions. He said, okay, so this is somebody else's car? Yeah. Okay, so we don't need money? No. And it knows where we're already going to go? Yeah. And by the time we got to our destination, he was like on a first name basis with the guy, and he then downloaded the app. So there is some element of C-Touch that I think will overcome adoption. But what's funny is we got to the end of this exercise, and this is how I'll close today. We got to the end of this exercise at Transportation Camp, and we ran all of this information and just sort of consensus-based, right? It was like, how many years until we get past the policy? How many years till we get past legislation? How many years till we get past adoption? And the number is 7 years from now. Isn't that great? And then a guy from Uber raised his hand in the back of the room. And he kind of said in this playful way, like, I've been watching all of this, and this is fun. But just so that you know, we've been around for 8 years, and while you might use Uber all the time, we have like 20% market penetration in the nation. 7 years, 20%. So all of a sudden, it was like all of that work seemed like it was just like a fun little exercise. But I think that, there are several hurdles, and if I had to say, it would probably be the adoption hurdle. The technology is the fourth one, is the perfecting the technology, and that's why you see these millions of miles being logged and analyzed. But out of those 4 pillars, I would say adoption will be kind of like the tougher one. And sort of this other one that's a little like integration with the existing infrastructure and existing vehicles. So how that's going to work, I don't know. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Much of what you talked about today, we tried to decipher in the class I was just in with everybody. I think we did a pretty decent job, and I just want to say thank you for making the statement that values matter in everything that we do today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Everyone, enjoy the rest of the program, and please travel safe.